The first time I saw him, the courtroom was cold, not because of the air, but because of him. The judge sat like a statue, locked into his chair, a body that would not move, a face that refused to smile. They called him powerful. They called him fair. But to me, he was something else. He was the wall that stood between me and my father's freedom. The whispers started the moment I walked in. People laughed under their breath. Their voices sharp like knives. They saw my torn dress, my messy hair, my bare hands clutching nothing. To them, I was just a poor girl, a child who had no place in a room built for power. But I kept walking. Each step echoed against the wooden floor. Each sound heavier than my heart. The judge's eyes followed me. Not his body, not his smile. Only his eyes. They were cold, but alive, watching me like I was a stranger walking into his kingdom. And in that moment, I felt two things: fear, because I was nothing compared to him, and fire, because even nothing can burn. I thought of my father, locked away because he fought back against the HOA. They said he broke rules, left his tools outside, parked his car the wrong way, but I knew the truth. The president wanted him gone. The judge gave her the power. It wasn't about rules. It was about control. And my father refused to bow. I stood before the bench. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from rage, and the words came out, words that silenced the room, words that made every head turn. Free my dad, and I'll heal you. At first there was nothing, no sound, no cough, not even the shuffle of a paper. Then the laughter began, cruel and sharp, bouncing off the courtroom walls. Neighbors covered their mouths. Lawyers smirked. The HOA president leaned back in her chair like she had already won. Poor girl promising to heal a paralyzed man. What could be more ridiculous? But I did not blink. I did not break. I looked straight into the judge's eyes and held my ground because I knew something they didn't. My hands were not ordinary. They carried something I couldn't explain, something I couldn't prove, but something I believed, and sometimes belief is sharper than truth. The judge's face did not change, no smile, no frown, only silence, but I saw it. A flicker in his eyes. Was it anger? Or was it curiosity? I could not tell. But it was enough to make me stand taller. They kept laughing. They called me crazy. They said my father would rot in jail. But I held my voice steady. Like fire refusing to die in the wind, I remembered nights with my father, fixing broken engines, holding rusty tools, wiping grease from his hands. He always said, "They can take the house, they can take the land, but they can't take your spirit." And now, my spirit stood against the strongest man in the town. The judge who never smiled. The president whispered something to the lawyer. I saw their smirks, their shaking heads. They thought I was making a fool of myself. Maybe I was. But fools have changed the world before. The judge finally spoke. His voice was low, rough, but it carried like thunder. And if you fail, what then? His words sliced through me. If I failed, my father would never be free. If I failed, the laughter would never end. If I failed, I would lose everything. I looked at him. I let the silence grow heavy, and then I answered, "Then you will destroy me." Gasps filled the room. No one expected those words from me. Not a girl with nothing, but I had nothing to lose. And that made me dangerous. The judge stared, his eyes colder than before, and then, nothing. He leaned back into his chair, his face still frozen, his body still trapped, and he said no more. The gavel struck. The room broke into noise, but I walked out calm, my heart louder than the crowd. I knew this was not the end. This was only the beginning, because that night, I felt something in my hands, a warmth, a spark, something alive. Was it real? Or was it madness? I did not know, but I knew one thing. The laughter in that courtroom would not last forever. And so I ask you, if you were in that room, would you have laughed with them? Or would you have believed me? The night after the courtroom, I walked back home through streets that never felt like home. Every house looked the same. Perfect lawns, white fences, mailboxes lined in perfect rows. It was supposed to look peaceful, but to me it looked like a prison built by rules, enforced by neighbors who smiled by day and destroyed lives by night. The HOA was everywhere. You could not plant a flower without permission. You could not paint your door the wrong shade of white. Even the height of your grass was written into law, and if you broke the rules, they fined you, they threatened you, they dragged you into court like they dragged my father. I remember the letters, each one harsher than the last. Red ink, bold warnings, Threats of liens and lawsuits. They called my father stubborn, reckless, defiant, but to me he was brave, the only man willing to stand against them, and for that, they caged him. The neighbors whispered about us. They crossed the street when they saw me. Their smiles were sharp, their voices dripping with pity. But pity was just another kind of poison they wanted me to break. To bow? To disappear. I did not break. I did not bow. I walked with my head high, even when my stomach was empty, even when my shoes were worn thin, because every step I took was for my father at night. I sat by the window of our small house. I looked at the quiet street, the perfect lawns, the trimmed hedges, and I thought about power. How could a group of neighbors, armed with nothing but paper and meetings, destroy lives? How could a judge, broken in body, rule over people like a god? And why was I the only one who dared to stand against them? The memory of his eyes haunted me. The judge who never smiled, who never moved, but that flicker I saw, that single moment when my words reached him. It burned in my mind. Maybe he was curious, maybe he wanted to believe, or maybe he feared me more than he showed. I clutched my hands tight. I remembered the warmth I felt after leaving the courtroom. It was strange, powerful, frightening. I could not explain it, but I held on to it like a secret weapon. Because when you have nothing, even a spark feels like a sword. The next day, the HOA president came to my door. She wore her perfect suit, her fake pearls shining in the sunlight. She smiled, but it was not kindness. It was venom. Your father's fines are increasing, she said, her voice sweet as poison. You should consider selling the house before it's taken from you. I said nothing. I only looked at her, and she did not like the way I looked back, because for the first time, I think she saw I was not afraid. She left with a smirk, but her eyes betrayed her. She was not used to being challenged. She was not used to being seen for what she really was that night. I walked past the judge's house. It was at the end of the cul-de-sac. Larger than all the others, lights glowed through the windows. But the house itself felt empty. I wondered if he sat there alone, trapped in silence, trapped in power. I wondered if he thought about my words, and I wondered if he believed. The neighborhood felt heavier with each step, like the houses themselves were watching me, like the rules were written into the walls and grass and mailboxes. I felt their weight pressing down. But I also felt the fire inside me growing stronger, because I knew the truth. Rules are only as strong as the fear that follows them, and I was done being afraid. I thought of my father's voice again. His words like anchors in my mind. They can take everything from you, but they can't take your spirit, and my spirit was louder than the rules, stronger than the board, brighter than the silence of the judge. The next morning, letters came again, more fines, more threats, more chains made of paper. I ripped them apart one by one, the sound echoing through the house like thunder. Let them send more, let them send hundreds. I would burn them all before I bowed, but deep inside, I knew something bigger was coming. The judge was not done with me. The HOA was not done with me. The game had only begun. And I was no longer just a poor girl in torn clothes. I was the fire that could not be ignored. And so I ask you, if every neighbor around you turned into your enemy, if every rule was used like a weapon against your family, would you fight back, or would you obey? They called it a crime. But what my father did was not a crime at all. It was defiance. It was resistance. It was the act of a man who refused to kneel. The board said he left too many tools in the yard: wrenches, hammers, an old engine block under the shade of a tree. They said it made the neighborhood look dirty, but to me, those tools were not junk. They were his life. Every dented wrench, every rusted nail, carried the story of a man who worked with his hands, a man who built more than he ever destroyed. They fined him once, then twice, then 100 times, but he kept working. He fixed cars for neighbors who couldn't afford repairs. He built fences for widows who couldn't lift a hammer. He gave more than anyone. But they didn't care about that. The HOA only cared about control, and when he parked his car outside, the final strike came: an old Chevy, loud, stubborn, refusing to die like its owner. They said it was a violation, unregistered, a disgrace to the street. But we both knew the truth. They didn't want the car gone. They wanted him gone because he would not bow, because he would not sell his land, because he was the last neighbor who dared to stand against them. I remember the night they came. 3 men in dark suits, carrying papers instead of chains. They knocked, but they did not wait for the door. They stepped inside. Voices like knives. Mr. Carter, you are in violation of Section 14, Paragraph 9. My father laughed. The kind of laugh that cuts deeper than anger. Violation of what? Being alive, he said the next day. He was in handcuffs, dragged from his own yard. His hands tied in front of the very tools he once used. Neighbors watched from their windows. Curtains trembling like frightened eyes. No one stepped out, no one spoke. Silence was the loudest weapon they had. I chased the police car down the street. My voice breaking. My legs burning, I screamed that it was wrong. That it was all lies, but my words were swallowed by the hum of engines. And the slam of a cell door, that was my father's crime, not the tools. Not the car. Not the yard. His crime was his spine. His crime was refusing to break, and for that, they put him in a cage. The judge was waiting for us in court. As if the whole thing had been planned, the president of the HOA sat in the front row, her smile like a crown on her head. She wanted the land. The board wanted obedience, and the judge wanted to remind the world that power was not mercy. It was fear. When I stood in that room, I saw my father's face through the bars, bruised but unbroken, and I felt the fire rise inside me again. That was when I spoke. That was when I told the judge, "Free my dad and I'll heal you." The laughter that followed still rings in my ears, not because it hurt me, but because I knew, one day, it would choke them. I held my ground. Even as they mocked me, I watched the judge, his face still frozen, but his eyes alive. He did not dismiss me. He did not strike me down. He only stared, and in that stare, I saw something strange, a man of power, but also a man of weakness, a man who lived in chains that no law could remove. I walked out of that courtroom, poor, powerless, but carrying a secret, because deep inside, I knew what I could do. My hands burned with it. My chest ached with it. I could not explain it. But I could feel it, and maybe, just maybe, the judge felt it too that night. I dreamed of my father. He was sitting in the yard, his tools scattered around him, the Chevy rumbling softly by his side. He looked at me and said, "They can lock my body, but they cannot lock your fire." I woke with tears in my eyes, and fists clenched so tight they trembled. The HOA thought the fight was over. The president thought she had won. The neighbors thought they were safe in their silence, but none of them understood the truth. The story had only begun, and I was not going to lose because my father's crime was not a crime. It was courage. And courage cannot be buried under paper. It cannot be silenced with chains. It cannot be erased by a judge's gavel. And so I ask you, if your father was taken for breaking rules that were never just, would you stay silent like the neighbors, or would you rise like fire? The room was heavy with silence, the kind that squeezes your chest until you can barely, but I did not shake. Because when you've already lost everything, fear has nothing left to take. I stepped closer to the bench, my shoes scuffed against the wooden floor, each sound pulling every eye toward me. The laughter from before still echoed in my ears. Cruel voices mocking me, calling me a poor girl with a wild tongue, but I carried those laughs like fuel. They thought I was weak, but weakness can be sharper than any blade when it turns to fire. I lifted my chin, looked the judge straight in the eyes, and let the words fall, "Free my dad, and I'll heal you." Gasps filled the air. Some coughed to cover their shock, some laughed louder to hide their fear. The president smirked, her voice dripping with poison. "Listen to her. Heal you. She's out of her mind." But I did not turn toward her. I did not waste my breath on people who only knew how to sneer. I only looked at him, the man who never smiled, the man who ruled with silence for the first time. I thought I saw something crack in his stare, not a smile, not a frown, but a flicker. A flicker that told me he was listening. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, this is nonsense. The girl is wasting the court's time." But the judge did not answer. He only raised a hand, a slow, trembling hand, and the room went still. He looked at me again, his voice low and cold. "And if you fail?" The words sliced through me like a blade. Every eye turned toward me, waiting for me to fall, waiting for me to choke on my own courage, but I did not choke. I swallowed the fear, and I let my answer burn the silence. "Then you will destroy me." The courtroom gasped as if the walls themselves had heard something forbidden. The president laughed again. But this time it was too loud, too forced. Even she felt the shift in the air. I could feel my hands trembling, not from weakness, but from something alive inside me, heat, a spark, a weight I couldn't explain. It was as if every word I spoke carried more than sound. It carried something unseen, something that made the judge's gaze linger longer than it ever had before. He leaned back in his chair, still silent, still frozen. But his eyes were not the same. They were searching, measuring, maybe even fearing I held his stare until the gavel fell. The sound thundered through the room. "Enough," he said. And just like that, the court was dismissed. But I knew something had changed. I saw it in the way the lawyers avoided my eyes. I saw it in the way the president clenched her jaw. And most of all, I saw it in the judge's silence. He was not dismissing me, he was testing me. As I left the room, whispers followed me: "Crazy girl, foolish girl, liar." But I walked taller than I had ever walked before because I knew they were wrong. Because I knew this was not madness. Because I knew the fire inside me was real. That night, I could not sleep. I sat by the window. Watching the shadows crawl across the street, I thought about his question. And if you fail? The judge had power to destroy my father forever. But he had also given me something I never expected. He had given me a choice. I clenched my fists, feeling that strange warmth again. If I was wrong, my father would rot in a cell. If I was right, the laughter would end. The board would break. The silence would shatter. I had never been more afraid, and I had never been more alive. The town was quiet outside, but I could feel its eyes on me. Every lawn, every trimmed hedge, every perfect mailbox was part of their cage, and now I was the crack forming in its walls. They thought I was small. They thought I was nothing, but even nothing can shake the ground when it dares to rise. The judge had asked me a question, but it was not his answer that mattered anymore. It was mine, and I had already chosen. So I ask you, if you stood before a man who held your father's fate in his hands, and the whole world laughed at you for speaking your truth, would you stay silent? Or would you dare to speak the impossible? All right, time to step into part 5, escalation and doubt. This is where the pressure gets heavier, where the whispers in town grow darker, and where the narrator begins to feel the true weight of the promise made to the judge. The sound of that gavel haunted me all night. It echoed in my chest, in my dreams. In the silence of my room, each strike reminded me of what I had said, what I had promised: free my dad, and I'll heal you. I sat by the window, staring into the street where the perfect lawns slept under moonlight. The houses looked calm. But I knew the people inside were not. I could almost feel their whispers crawling toward me, circling my home like wolves. They would say I was crazy, reckless, a liar, and maybe they were right. But deep inside, a voice kept telling me I was not wrong. Morning came too slow when I walked outside. I could feel the stairs on my back. Neighbors paused in their gardens, their shears hanging in the air. Their eyes sharp, and cold children stopped playing, their laughter turning into quiet curiosity. I was no longer invisible. I was marked at the store. The whispers followed me. That's her, the girl who defied the judge. She thinks she can heal people. Imagine that. She's trying to play God. I kept my head high, but inside I was trembling. Every word was a stone thrown at me. And yet I walked on because I knew fear was what they wanted, and I refused to give it to them still. When I came home, I locked the door and leaned against it for the first time. Doubt seeped into me like poison. What if I was wrong? What if I had spoken madness instead of truth? What if my father would pay the price for my pride? I pressed my hands against the table, remembering the heat I had felt in the courtroom. That spark, that fire, that strange weight in my chest. It had not been imagination, it had been real. But what if real was not enough? The night fell again, darker than before. I dreamed of the judge's face, still as stone, his eyes piercing through me. I dreamed of my father's hands gripping iron bars, reaching out but never touching mine. I woke with tears burning my eyes. And the same question in my head: can I do this? Or will I fail the next morning? A letter arrived, no stamp, no name, only one line written in sharp ink: you have one chance. My hand shook as I read it again and again. The handwriting was stiff, controlled, almost like it was carved instead of written. Was it from him, the judge, or was it from someone else who wanted to see me break? I didn't know, but I felt the weight of it sink into my chest like stone. One chance, no more. No less that evening, I went to see my father through the bars. His eyes looked tired but proud. He smiled at me. The smile I hadn't seen in weeks. They're scared of you, he whispered. I blinked. Confused. Who's scared, I asked. All of them, he said. His voice low. The board. The neighbors. Even the judge. Because you said what no one else ever dared to say. Tears stung my eyes. I pressed my hand against the cold metal. Dad, what if I can't? His voice broke into a laugh. Soft but strong. Then at least you tried. And sometimes trying is more dangerous than winning. Left that night with his words burning in me, more dangerous than winning. What did he mean by that? Did he know something I didn't? Was there a secret hidden behind his calm smile? As I walked home, the streets felt heavier, darker. I saw shadows moving where no one stood. I heard footsteps that stopped when I turned, and for the first time, I wondered if someone was following me when I reached my door. I found it unlocked. My heart froze. I knew I had locked it slowly. I pushed it open, every creak of the wood louder than thunder in my ears. The house was dark. Too dark. I stepped inside. My breath shallow, then I saw it on my table. Another note. This one was shorter. 3 words only. Time is near. My knees weakened. I grabbed the edge of the table. The world spinning around me. Who was leaving these notes? The judge, the board, or something else? I sat in the dark, clutching the paper, trembling but refusing to break if they wanted to scare me. They had succeeded. But fear was not enough to stop me because I had made a promise and I would rather burn than break it. Still, one thought kept drilling into my head. If I failed, my father would lose everything, and maybe, so would I. So I ask you, if you were given only one chance, no second tries, no safety nets, would you take the risk? Or would you let silence keep you safe? The next morning, I found myself walking toward the courthouse again. I didn't know why, but my feet carried me there as if they already knew what was waiting. The steps felt heavier, like each one dragged me deeper into something I could never escape inside. The air was different. The usual buzz of people was gone. The hallways were quiet. Too quiet. It was like the building was holding its breath when I reached the courtroom. The doors stood open. Empty benches stretched before me. Only one figure sat at the front, in that towering chair that once seemed untouchable. The judge, his hands rested on the arms of his chair. Still and heavy, his eyes locked on me the moment I stepped in. But there was no anger, no threat, only something I couldn't understand. You came, he said, his voice low but sharp. It cut through the silence like a blade I swallowed. My throat dry. I didn't plan to. I whispered, neither did I. He replied. I froze, confused. What did he mean by that? His face was unreadable. The same cold mask he wore in every trial, but his words, they cracked something open. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You think you can heal me, he said. The way he spoke, it wasn't a question. It was a challenge, like he wanted me to prove it, or fail trying. I felt my chest tighten, the memory of that spark, that fire in the courtroom. It came back to me the moment when my words made the air burn. It had been real. I knew it had been real. I whispered. And for the first time, I saw his lips twitch, not a smile, but something close. He stood. Slowly, every movement was heavy. As if the weight of stone pulled on him, I could see the pain in his body, the stiffness in his legs, the tremor in his hands. He was strong in mind, but broken in flesh. He walked down the steps of his bench, one slow step at a time, and when he stood in front of me, I realized how fragile he really was. The robe could not hide it. The authority could not mask it. He was a man trapped inside a failing body. Show me, he said. 2 words, but they shattered me. I hesitated, my hands trembling. What if it didn't work? What if I failed and proved them all right? What if my father paid the price? But then I remembered the letters. You have one chance. Time is near. This was it. This was the chance. I raised my hand. Slowly, the air felt heavy again, thick with something I couldn't explain. My skin burned as I reached toward him, not with pain, but with power, something deep, something ancient. When my palm hovered over his chest, his breath caught. The silence deepened. I felt it again. The spark had jumped from me to him, a pulse of heat that made the floor tremble. His eyes widened. He staggered back for a moment. The mask of power slipped from his face, and I saw fear. "What are you?" he whispered. The word stung because I didn't know the answer myself, but before I could speak, he raised his hand. "Enough," he said, his voice was trembling, but still carried weight. "Leave now." Before they see I froze. They? Who was he talking about? I wanted to ask, but his eyes told me not to, so I turned, my heart pounding, my skin still burning from the spark I left the courtroom. But his words followed me into the street. Before they see that night, I could not sleep. The whispers outside my house grew louder, the shadows stretched longer, and the notes on my table now had company. 3 words written in the same sharp ink: "We are watching." My chest ached, my head spun, I felt caught in a web I didn't understand, and yet a question gnawed at me until morning came. The judge had asked me what I was, but maybe the real question was, who was watching us, and what did they want? So I ask you, if someone gave you the power to break rules of nature, but warned you that others were watching, would you use it, or would you hide it forever? The night of the storm changed everything. The sky cracked with thunder. Rain fell like broken glass, and the streets of our perfect neighborhood drowned in shadows. I stood at my window, staring out at the chaos, my hands still burning with the memory of what I had done in that courtroom. The judge's voice echoed in my head: "Before they see." I didn't know who they were, but I knew they were close. The notes, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. It all made sense now. This wasn't about me alone. It wasn't just about my father. It was bigger, darker, older. Then a knock at my door, slow, heavy, like it already knew my heart would stop at the sound. I opened it, and there he was, the judge, soaked from the rain, trembling from pain, but standing, not in his chair, not in weakness, standing. "You did this," he said. His voice cracked with something I had never heard before. Not anger, not power, but fear. He stepped inside, his robe dragging water across my floor. I could see his hands shake, not from weakness, but from something stronger than him. "Them," he whispered. "They know now. They're coming," I swallowed, my chest heavy. "Who are they?" I asked. His eyes darted to the window, as if expecting shadows to break through the board. "The neighbors." "No, not just them," he said, his voice falling to a whisper. "They have been here longer than you can imagine. They keep balance. They decide who holds power, and you broke it." His words sliced through me. Balance, power broken. I thought of my father behind bars, of the neighbors with their cold stares, of the perfect lawns and painted fences, all of it. Just a mask for something deeper. "Why me?" I asked. "Why my family?" He looked at me then, really looked. "Because you carry what they fear most," he said, "and because you dared to speak it out loud." Lightning lit the room, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes, not just fear, recognition, as if he knew me. Long before I had stood in his courtroom, but before I could ask. The window shattered. Glass rained across the floor. The wind howled inside, and shadows moved where no one should stand. Figures stepped in, tall, faceless, cloaked in the storm. Their voices weren't voices at all, they were echoes, like the sound of stone grinding in the earth. "She is not ready," they said. Every word vibrating through my bones. The judge fell to his knees, his body trembling. "She can do it," he pleaded. "She can heal. She can break. She is the key." The figures turned to me. I felt their weight press against my chest. It was like drowning without water, like burning without fire. I wanted to scream, to run, to hide, but instead, I raised my hand the same way I had in the courtroom. The spark came again, fierce, alive, and for the first time, I didn't fight it. The shadows froze, the echoes cracked, and the storm outside roared as if the sky itself bowed down when it ended. They were gone. The judge lay on the floor, breathing but shaken, and me. I stood in the silence, my skin still burning, my chest still glowing. The judge looked up at me. "They'll come again," he said, his voice broken. "You may have won tonight, but power like yours doesn't go unnoticed." I stepped toward him. "What about my father?" I whispered. His eyes softened, and for the first time, he smiled. Not the cruel smile of the courtroom, but the tired smile of a man who had carried secrets too long. "Consider him free," he said. The weight on my chest lifted, but another weight took its place. Freedom for my father. But chains for me because I knew now this wasn't over, it was only beginning, and so I ask you, if you discovered a power inside you that made enemies you couldn't even see, would you keep fighting, or would you walk away before it consumed you too?